Well, good morning, and it's 2 minutes past 8 a.m. On the morning of, I think, aren't we into the 10th today? Let's see. Let's make sure that we've got that right. I think it's the 10th. Uh, There's where we got the time right. Anyway, 3 minutes past 8. This is Mirador Television coming out of the southeast of England in Lewes, the county town of East Sussex. I'm Keith Hayes. They call me Mr. Heath. Well, sometimes they do. And the reason I got that title was that I spent a lot of time overseas, and a lot of people couldn't pronounce my name, particularly the last name, Hyas. So they all called me Mr. Keith. And that reminded me of the very, very strong line in Sidney Poitier's movie with Rod Steiger, In the Heat of the Night. They call me Mr. Tibbs. Well, one of the really great lines, strangely enough, in movies. And of course, um, Sidney Poitier died at the end of last week, and a fine, fine actor he was. And I had a couple of things that evoked memories for me from some of those movies, and we'll chat about that in a little while, perhaps. But first of all, what's it doing outside? It's going to reach about 7 or 8 degrees. There's a nice red sky in the distance, but it's a red sky at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. So it can suggest that we're not going to have much decent weather. And in fact, the forecast is for a slight drizzle, but also a slight breeze. And as long as the breeze stays slight, we're okay. I at long last succumbed to, I think, the COVID bug, but once again, the complete absurdity of the situation that we find ourselves in the moment we hand ourselves over to computers. And I'm doing a series in this coming months called the Triffic Chronicles. Why is it called the Triffic Chronicles? Well, I'll explain that at some future date. But what it really is all about how computers are taking over our lives. And I actually wanted one of these fast thingamajig, um, whatever they are. Anyway, just to check whether I'd got COVID. So I went to the dentist. I was the dentist, the chemist at the end of last week, and there are big notices splattered all over the place. We have no lateral thinking watchets to test your COVID. So in other words, don't bother to come in and ask. I had to go to my own chemist, the fabulous Wyborns on just at the entrance to Friars Walk, bottom of Station Street. Super people they are, and I've been with them for years and years and years and years and years. And I said to him, what are the chances of you getting some in, even for regular customers such as me? And he laughed. So everybody says go online. So I came home and I went online. I'm a bit loath to do these things because I don't understand them. So basically, the answer came back is we don't have any to dispense at the moment, but we're going to give you a number. So you take the number down to your chemist and you get you get one of these kits. No, you don't. They haven't got any. It's the absurdity. And who do you speak to? You know, there's nobody in charge except the computer. And we more and more and more have the establishment and industry and our health and so on and so forth reliance upon the computer. The computer is only a computer. It's only a machine, and yet it's beginning to drive industry, drive finance, drive health, drive almost anything. When are we going to wake up to the fact that computers are inanimate objects? They only do what they're told, and what they're told, they don't change. If they are programmed to say good morning, sir, and a lady comes into the room, they still say good morning, sir. They don't have the capacity to change it to good morning, madam, unless it's been programmed in. Now, it's absolutely crazy that we allow these situations to exist, but we do. And people rant and rave about all sorts of things, but not about the computer and how it's taken over our lives and to the detriment. Banks are by far the worst. Credit card companies are pretty close second. Mind you, there are some credit card companies where not only the computer reigns, but the management is pretty awful too. So it's a toss up as to whether you get a bad computer or a bad manager. But the NHS is crazy, and there are complaints after complaint after complaint in social media, and I don't take that necessarily always as telling us what's going on in the community. But if a pattern starts, and most people cannot get to see a doctor, they are a rare breed. Now, why? Now, the first thing is it's all because of COVID. No, it's not. It's because bigger seemed to be better. Now, sometimes bigger is better. But in the case of the NHS and local surgeries and local hospitals and so on, bigger is not better. It has proved to be devastating. And to get to see a doctor is crazy. And to try and use the computer to get what you want is 9 times out of 10 crazy. Yes, there are some things that work, but generally speaking, it is crazy. We've handed our lives, our way of doing things over to computers, and that is a huge weakness for humankind. And the reason that I actually say the Day of the Triffids or the Triffids Chronicle is looking at some of the nonsensical things that happen with computers, such as I just examined, and to say, listen, we are being taken over and we are blindly allowing it to happen until one day we will find that we have no human capacity to establish and steer our own destiny. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow the computers to tell us what's here, there, and everywhere. Anyway, the news. They've lifted an 18-year-old, I think it is, who has been setting fire to barns quite regularly. And of course, there was one tragic one some months ago in which a number of horses were burned to death, and they've caught him. And that probably is the biggest news. The only thing is that the stats say, the statistics say, be careful about statistics, is that we seem to have seen the worst of COVID, and that the number of cases are going down. But the distaff side, if you like, to that is that locally we are still pumping out a fair amount of infection. And if I had it, I had it. And if I didn't have it, I didn't have it. How the hell I can find out, I have no idea. All I can tell you is that I felt pretty lousy, that I was sick, and that, I mean, sick in vomiting sense, and that yesterday I started to feel a little better. And this morning, I feel well enough to actually come and rant and rave on the air, although I'm not going into the studio. But what happens, of course, is that then industry businesses grind to a halt because the key people can't be there. So I will. I'll do the self-isolating thing today, and then that will have given me my 5 days, which they've now said it's still supposedly 7, but the cabinet is all for turning it into 5. Give me the 5 days, and if I'm still all right tonight, then tomorrow I shall get cracking again. But that's the silly nonsense of our life at the moment. Really, quite silly nonsense. Right, okay. Info Globi is live. That means that the people in Kosovo are on the air. They let me know every morning. Here are our own newspaper headlines. The PM. This is the I. The PM is expected to announce living with COVID plan by March, and basically what he's going to say is we're over the worst, and now what we'll have to do is we'll have to limit some things, but generally speaking, we can get back towards some sort of normalcy. That new measures will not be needed, and that we can start to ease up on some of the others. Now he's already taken a risk by doing that. And I'm sure that it'll be all welcome by everybody if we can continue going back to some sort of normalcy. although I doubt that life is ever going to be normal again, ever. Well, when I say normal, we'll never go back. We lived history, and we didn't know it in 2019, leading into 2020. That sort of life has gone. It's gone forever. Lockdown has changed so many different things. I'm not sure that we are ready to actually accept some of the changes that have come into our lives, whether it be in business or leisure, pleasure, finances, or whatever. And I think that the changes are going to be enormous. But anyway, it looks as if the government policy is, we think that it's beginning to ease, and therefore we are not going to penalise everybody anymore. What we're going to do is to look at the ways that we can bring us back to some sort of normalcy. The Daily Telegraph, Sunak backs call for the 5-day isolation. They're obviously beginning to sort of sound out who might be the heir in waiting for Boris if he fumbles the ball again. So the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said this morning or today, hey, let's ease to 5 days. And I'm listening to him. And why not? Incidentally, one thing not in the papers, and there is a big headline, a bit of news about Djokovic, the tennis player, who had been denied entry into Australia. His lawyers appealed to a court which has told the government, you're wrong, you can't stop him coming in, as he meets the criteria. And as a consequence, he will now be able to take part in the Australian Open. Very interesting, the pictures, because where does news bias end and where does it begin? And the reporter for at least one major television operation, let us not be unkind and point the finger, showed pictures of what it called the supporters of Djokovic. And indeed, the two notable things. First of all, they weren't waving the Australian flag, they were waving the Serbian flag. And secondly, they were doing a dance that is common almost throughout the Balkans. And to be quite honest with you, having done it many, many, many times, and I suppose that it's quite nice to sort of join in and drop out, which you're able to do because it goes on endlessly. But the dance itself is like paint drying. Excitement? No. Participation now and again. But that's interesting that the so-called protesters were obviously of Serbian heritage. And so they would naturally support a Serbian tennis player. But does that say that Australians generally welcome the decision? I don't know, but that doesn't fill me with confidence for the sort of reporting that we should expect. The Metro going Cron. Let's see. It is the Metro is good news that coronavirus cases have started to fall. That Omicron may have peaked, with new cases falling for 5 days in a row. The rate of increase is falling in every region in England except the northeast, the paper adds. Well, that's funny because there's a little block down here that says that we have been increasing. Perhaps that's changed overnight. The Times, will avoid the COVID crisis, says upbeat NHS chiefs. Actually, the Times is quite interesting because no, I thought that it might well have been it can't be the pictures of the victory for Djokovic because it only happened just about an hour or two ago. We'll avoid the COVID crisis, says the upbeat NHS chiefs. What they're saying is that they're beginning to get on top of this variant and infections and so on. So let's cross our fingers, because the one thing that I have begun to understand about this virus is that it's a very clever virus, very, very clever indeed. And what it does is it actually what the Americans call it goes around tight end. In other words, in American football, if you see a big defensive wall in front of you, what you do is you sneak around the edge of the play, this variant or this virus seems to be able to do that. And every time we think we've capped it and stopped it, it pops up again. Anyway, the Guardian, Gove's £4 billion cladding plan, far too little to end fire safety crisis. And that goes back to the fire that it burned many people to death, the fatalities of the fire of the cladding around it. And the government has said we'll replace this cladding, and they put or Gove suggested £4 billion to replace it, and then so as usual, people have said that's too little, too late. But at least it's a step in the right direction, I would have thought. Never mind. But that's the Guardian never will. Oh, damn! We've lost what we. That's dreadful. Oh, there we go. We've got it back, I think. Yeah, so this all self-obvious is okay. The only thing is you don't have enough hands for it. There's too many little things to tap. Anyway, the Guardian, which will always be never sympathetic to any Conservative government, says that that's too little, too late. The Daily Mail, save us from the cost of living crisis, Boris. Well, now, the Mail is taking a different tack. And what it's saying is that, look, inflation is about to hit about 6%. Prices, as a consequence, are rising. The benefits and the salaries and so on and so forth, in other words, all revenue for whichever sector of society, are not rising in place. So, in other words, people are starting to find that some of the things they can afford, they can't afford. Well, that's happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to you. There's some people who will say, I don't know what the fuss is about, except that their own savings or their own wealth will be whittled away by inflation. If you're paying a couple of percent more for something, it's bound to have an effect. But some of his cabinet are saying, hey, listen, let's get back to good old Conservative values. We've given a lot of money away. We've been as socialist as anything in our approach to COVID and so on. Let's not keep on doing it for absolutely every little thing, because that's what we're in danger of doing. And the cost of living is beginning to surge, and one would expect it after a crisis such as we've been through. The Daily Express, the PM urged, act now on cost of living squeeze. The Express, of course, quite often is supportive of the government. So even the Express is saying to Boris, or at least it's reporting that people are saying to Boris, get your act together now. What you've got to do is make life reasonably comfortable for people now that we've got through this the crisis. The Daily Mirror, failing on every level. The Mirror, of course, is it's really talking about classrooms and the fact that the government has said it's putting all sorts of money into all sorts of schools to make sure that there is a standard right throughout the system. And it's saying that, sorry, it's not. And it quotes some school in the north of England where the ceiling has collapsed and water is pouring in onto the desks, and the children can't get their education. The Financial Times, NATO stands ready for conflict in Europe. Alliance chief warns Russia. Now, we tend to take our eye off the ball with things that are happening outside our own backyard when we get into things like COVID. And there is no question that the major powers are finely tuned at probing one another to see how far each can go. And Mr. Putin, President Putin, is probing NATO and the West in the edge of Ukraine, a part of the world that I am reasonably familiar with. having worked there, perhaps 6 or 7 years ago. And the unfortunate thing is that it does look as if he keeps on amassing troops there, that he's going to tempt NATO to see what it'll do if he crosses the border. And NATO is saying to him, listen, chaps, the West, which we represent basically, isn't going to let you do that, and we're going to stop you. Now, that means conflict. And just a little while ago, just last week, the major powers said that they would agree not to a nuclear war. Well, that doesn't mean to say any other form of war. And let's hope that we're not getting to the point where there is a crisis. If my colleague Stuart was here, he would say, no, it's not going to happen. I am not so sure that we live in an age where leadership is thin. We don't really have the quality of leaders that we used to. That we are fine-tuned for seeing if there is one-upmanship, and that all you need is it's like the rioting crowd is they're contained until somebody fires a shot, and then it all goes haywire, even though the shot was harmless. So there we are. That's going there. The star, my lovely daily star, is "You're so vain." The star says that modern men are so vain that they are spending more time in the mirror, looking in the mirror, than at women. And it uses one of those musical pieces. I have to say that because can't remember who sings it, but "You're so vain. I think you will think this song is about you." And that's what it's quoting is, "You're so vain." In other words, we all are far more interested in the way that we look instead of women. Well, I'll tell you, they can send any of the women that are fighting difficultly with that my way. I'm perfectly happy not to look in the mirror and to have a bevy of fine beauties around me. Can't you tell? So those are the headlines and the newspapers. The other that is not reported here is there is a fire in the Bronx in New York City, and because we have we have colleagues in New York, and we do like to keep an eye on our favorite nation, if you like, the Americans. So that is big news because it's a fire in which several people already look as if they are badly affected, and that life may be lost, reflective of what went on a couple of years ago here, and the fallout of which we're still seeing when it comes to this cladding issue. Oop, there we go. Always get hiccups at about this time of the day. And I hope that the unfortunate thing is that when I got hiccups over the weekend, it was rather more serious than I hope it is this morning. Wow. Let's take a little break, shall we? Let's take a little break. I love this one because it shows Lewis in the summer, and a favorite place of mine, and I'm sure a favorite place of yours, where you can actually lose yourself for a few minutes. The beautiful park, Southover Grange. Interesting park. because the Grange was owned by the family called Newtons, who supported Oliver Cromwell in the English Civil War. They were quite ardent purists, Puritans, and they made life quite harsh here in Lewes. They also managed to duck and dive, so that when Charles came back to the throne, he didn't do anything to them. They carried on as usual, and in fact, when the Prince Regent needed a place to bonk his mistress, they gave him the key to the back door. And our own Queen Elizabeth in 1951, prior to the year of her father's death, 1952, came to Lewes and planted a tree, I think it was, in those grounds. But it was built from stone from the priory, Lewes Priory, which was pulled down at the dissolution of the monasteries in about 1553, 1554, thereabouts. And it still stands. So it is a fine mansion, and it was described in its day as being by far the finest house anywhere in Lewes. So that the gardens or the grounds, which were much more extensive than they are now, were turned into a park, a public park, and we can go and enjoy a lot of it, and enjoyable it is. And it is nice to look at that house, even though it's got a bit of a checkered history. So that is the Grange Park, which you've just seen. Going on to other things, I think that it is a good thing that, well, it's always a good thing when a criminal is taken into custody, is found. But in this particular instance, the major news in crime is that they caught the young bloke who's been setting fire to a lot of barns. I never quite understand why they're fascinated with setting barns alight. Probably because there's hay in them and are easy to kindle. But anyway, he's been caught and now will appear in, I assume, in Lewes Crown Court. And that happened, I think, on Friday or Saturday. The other major news, if you're interested in tennis, but also, I suppose, if you're interested in what is right and wrong for countries and the establishment to do, is that Djokovic, the tennis player, has been given leave to play in the Australian Open tennis tournament after a court quashed the Australian government's attempts to stop him entering the country. In fact, he was being held in, according to some reports, in an immigrant hotel, and it wasn't very nice, particularly for a man who's got his pockets bulging with lots of cash. So that's where we stand this morning. Outside, yes, the red sky has disappeared. It is not raining yet, and the breeze, which is said to be mild, is not rocking any of the trees. So when I do actually this program from outside the studio, from home, those are the things that I actually look at. And I must say that they seem to be reflecting what the forecasters are saying. So when you go out, do be careful. I'm not going out. I can't really, if I'm going to be responsible. And we'll see how the day progresses. Might come back on from time to time to let you know what's happening. All right, where do we go from here? Well, one of the things that, of course, we are entering is the Queen's Jubilee year. And there are going to be, I think it was announced over the weekend, a schedule of events, so including Trooping the Colour and various parties and various things that are going to take place across the country to celebrate 75 years on the throne. Is it 75? Yes, it's 75 years on the throne. And I thought, I was thinking back, where was I in 1951? 1952. The coronation was in 1953. that the late King George VI died in 1952. And I was saying to somebody over the weekend who was asking about the way that things happen, is that we don't hang about when it comes to kings and queens. And when the king dies, the king is dead. Long live the queen. So even though the coronation was some months later after the king's death, the queen was pitched into being head of state at a very young age. We, in those days, I suppose, did we understand that longevity, even for some of us, because I suppose that when I was a very young boy, is that if you reached 60 or 65, you were doing well. If you reached 70, then you were aged. Nowadays, of course, is you hear people say they died, they were 85, or very young, weren't they? And perhaps that's true. Although I must say that on a day-to-day basis, as I nudge into that decade, is my old body does feel worn out sometimes, or at least it feels the strain of being the age that I am. Not COVID, don't think. Just a little touch of a cold still. But what we're going to do is, because I started to think back to the mighty, mighty changes that have taken place over that period of 75 years. And of course, in 1952, we still had rationing, would you believe? A number of things were still on ration. And in the programs that we're going to do, we're going to hopefully show you what life was like then. We'll do it as amusing and entertaining way as we possibly can. But how do we travel? Steam trains still, of course. But buses and trams, and what did they look like? And how did they operate? And what about the cars? What sort of cars did we drive? But mostly, what did we eat? Because some people have said that the diet forced on us by war was much healthier than it is today, and that in fact longevity has started to creep in for those people who, like me, were youngsters during that period. What did we have? Well, when I was doing a bit of research over the weekend, the one thing that I did remember, and we got to look at school dinners. What were school dinners like? I mean, my own memory is that mostly they were okay. The only thing that I found is you were forced to eat. You cleaned your bloody plate, otherwise you sat there until you had before going back to class. Perhaps some people preferred that. But because I was forced to eat watercress, which I didn't like the smell and so on. So it's now I can't actually physically have watercress on a plate. It actually has an adverse effect on me. I mean, it makes me nauseous, and it doesn't bring me out in spots, but it could do. But I one thing that I do remember, and they said, you would have semolina, so that little seed which added water and so on, made a very cheap pudding. And they put a dollop of jam in the middle of it. And what we would do is we would make little curlicues and so on with the jam, and then stir it until in the end what you've got is a Greek purple jam-colored mass in front of you, which you then devoured with great gusto. So hopefully what we're going to try and do is to bring a reflection of what life was like in 1952 to you, right from how we moved about, what school was like, what meals were like, how do we suffer under rationing. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was 52, 53, thereabouts. The sweets came off ration. You were only limited to a certain amount of chocolate. And you had a little book the family had a little book. It had a coupon in it, and you went along and you gave the coupon, and you were allowed a quarter of this and a quarter of that and a bar of this and a bar of that. But it wasn't very much. And for the longest time in my younger days, we had a little square of chocolate given to us each week, not a bar, a little square. And sweets came off ration in about 1952-53. And God bless us, within days, there wasn't a sweet to be had anywhere in the shops. So the government very hastily said, don't throw away your ration books. We didn't anyway, because coal and other fuel, petrol, and that sort of thing was still very much on in rationing. But hang on, because we're going to actually bring back rationing for sweets. So what we hope to do is to do a little series of programs. They won't be very long, 2 minutes, 3 minutes perhaps, just reflecting on what it was like, what life was like in 1952. And life was interesting in 1952. What do we sing to? What do we play? What sort of sports did we have? And the interesting thing is, what television programs did we watch? Well, the answer is that in London, some people were able to watch the odd television program. But in the rest of the country, we still hadn't got the network of relay aerials, which were huge masts, to bring television to the masses, if you like. As a consequence, we didn't get television until about early 1953, just in time to watch the coronation, and just in time, I think it was 1953, to watch the Matthews final, the FA Cup final, in which Sir Stanley Matthews, playing for Blackpool, can't remember who they were playing against. I think it was one of the Manchester teams. No, it wasn't. I can't remember who he was against. But anyway, Blackpool were something like 3-1 down at half time. Stanley Matthews, they kept passing him the ball, and he kept dribbling it with his wizardry down the right-hand side and popping it across. And his forwards kept nodding it into the net. And I think the game ended 4-3 for Blackpool. And it's always been known as the Matthews final. So football was very different then too, and it was always played on a Saturday, always Saturday afternoon. And not only that, there were no such things as substitutes. No, if somebody got injured, they stayed on, and if they too poorly hurt to stay on, they were carted off. They were carted off into the dressing room, and that's where they stayed, and everybody else motored on with 10 men or 9 men or whatever. So those are the sort of things that were. That was what life was like. The policeman on the beat. You went to the doctor. You didn't make an appointment. You just popped in. There were surgeries twice a day, and you were given a syrup of figs to make sure that your bones stayed sturdy. All right, it's 8:41. Let's see if there is a little. Well, let's look at this promo just for a moment or two, because it's still valid. Well, indeed, Happy New Year. And I can remember a few years ago somebody saying, when do you stop saying Happy New Year? And apparently, if you haven't seen anybody, it's the first greeting early in the New Year, you could say Happy New Year. So I suppose it carries on. St. Stephen's Stephen's day, the 6th, 12th night has now departed. Do away with your Christmas decorations and celebrations. It's time to get stuck into a new year. And we are going as hard and as fast as we possibly can. 8:42, 8:42, and Jack DeManio isn't ruling today. We haven't forgotten too much. Not that there's too much to remember just yet. So we're looking ahead to things. The one thing that my colleague and friend Stuart Dolby is going to be doing, upping his game, as it were. He's been doing Energy Matters on Mirador, and he warned us 2 or 3 months ago what was going to happen in terms of energy price rises and so on and so forth. And of course, a prophet is without honor in his own country. So people were sort of saying, yeah, shut up, you're just a doom sayer, Stuart. But in fact, he was absolutely right. He got it spot on. And you can hear what his assessment and even predictions are on Mirador. On each Wednesday, he does the program, and we carry it for the rest of the week. So it's Energy Matters with Stuart Dolby, and it's well worthwhile tuning in for that. Right, we're sort of flapping a bit this morning because the news is very odd. I will go back over the papers again very quickly, just for those people who are only just tuning in. The I paper is the PM expects to announce living with a COVID plan by March. The Daily Telegraph, Sunak backs a call for 5-day isolation. The Metro, going cron. And basically what that's all about is that the cases of Omicron are beginning to fall. And the latest news that I could find, anyway, from the weekend is that here in the States it kept on rising. That we were still in danger, and to be very careful. But anyway, generally speaking, across the country, it seems that we've reached the crisis limit. The Times will avoid a COVID crisis, says upbeat NHS chiefs. Even the NHS, for whom I sometimes have little regard, are saying, "Hey, I think it's okay." We've got enough capacity now, and with the dip in cases, that we can handle the whole thing. And I'm quite sure that somebody else will come out within 24 hours to say that we can't. The Guardian, the government's £4 billion cladding plan for far too little to end the fire safety crisis. So changing the cladding to this incombustible stuff on public housing isn't enough, says the Guardian. The Daily Mail, save us from the cost of living crisis, Boris. That is more concerning to all of us. Inflation is said to be nudging 6%, and that's one hell of a rise, and particularly for people who have been so used to having zero inflation for so many years, it's actually started to zoom, and of course that affects prices in the shops. It affects all sorts of things in terms of the cost of living, and it will pass on to energy and so on and so forth. But the paper also says that people's wages are not going up in keeping with inflation. So what we're going to do is have a very discontented public if we're not very careful. The Daily Express, the PM urged, act now on the cost of living squeeze. Same thing. The Mirror, failing on every level. The Mirror has taken the government to task on the basis that some schools are falling to bits. And there was a so-called levelling up, which means that all schools will be treated the same in the way that the approach is there. And it's saying, well, no, you ain't. You're failing. The Financial Times steps outside the headlines of the other papers and says, look, NATO and Russia are in a standoff because reasonably determined that Putin is going to push over the border into Ukraine. In the area regards Donbass, Ukraine, excuse me if I'm a little weary at the moment. When you are ill, one thing that happens is that you don't sleep terribly well. You wake up in the middle of the night thinking about things, and they're quite illogical thoughts. But when you get up, facing the day isn't half as bad as you thought it was at night, but does it keep you awake? And the star, you're so vain. It's lovely. It says that men are too busy looking into the mirror to make sure that they got all their little accoutrements and so on in place, so their hair is just the nth degree. Take note, Andrew Sloan. Andrew is the boss of Grizzlies, which is going to be the most remarkable hairdressers anywhere in Lewis, anywhere in the southeast, I would have thought. When you get a Jack Daniels and coffee, it's amazing what a difference it makes waiting for the barber. All right. That's more or less the national press. But added to that is two things. One, a big fire in New York City, in the Bronx, where firefighters are trying to put out a blaze in a tower block. And already there are people injured, if not fatalities. And secondly, Djokovic, the tennis player, has been allowed into, or will be allowed into Australia to play in the Australian Open, having previously been denied by the Australian government. And now a court has ruled that they have no right to keep him out. So there he goes. Right, okay. I'm getting a little dry this morning, and the reason that normally you would say, "Oh, Keith, for God's sake, sometimes we can't shut you up," and the reason that I'm just dragging a bit is because I've been ill over the weekend. It just so happens that something has just said that the battery is very low now on the iPad that I'm broadcasting from. So it's probably a good time for me to say goodbye on Tweedlepip. I hopefully haven't got COVID, but if you've got the symptoms, tuck up, stay well. Know that at long last, we think that the crisis has been reached, the peak of the crisis has been reached, and that it's encouraging news all the way on, down from here on in. So that's it. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Until then, take care, and we'll. I think. Oh dear! I just touched something. Until then. Let's just play before we actually play the complete thing. Let us just play this because it lightens my mood, and I hope it lightens your heart. So that's it for this Monday morning. It is 8:52. Get up and get out there. It's mild. Well, 8 degrees. It's not terribly cold, not the way it has been. Only a slight breeze. In fact, at the moment, no breeze at all. So 8 degrees will feel like 8 degrees. And generally speaking, the rain so far has held off, but it is going to drizzle until tomorrow, and hopefully being able to call me Mr. Keith tomorrow is because I will have got over this whatever I had. Hopefully it wasn't COVID, but whatever I had, I'll get over it, and I'll be back, perhaps with a little better smile on my face than I've had this morning. Toodles. Well, now isn't that interesting? It doesn't want to shut off.